Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Now, as always with the Middle East, and especially since the tenure seemingly of Donald Trump, and even before that, if we're completely honest, there's always shifting alliances in the region between different powers, even those who have disagreed on major issues for many years as well. And this is not necessarily within that context, but it is certainly indicative of a shift where we now have Turkey and Egypt that have had the first official talks in about 8 years taking place between their respective governments and officials. They disagree on a lot. I mean, they disagree on Libya and they disagree on the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a lot there, and those are very sensitive issues. All of the above are sensitive issues. Nevertheless, it's always nice to see when countries sit down and discuss their differences instead of just completely ignoring each other and or using rhetoric either way against each other. Will this then create a new dawn? Will this usher in a new dawn, if I may use that term then, between the two nations? And what does this signify? Why now? Why is this timing important at this point for these two governments to reach out to each other in this fashion? Let's discuss those issues a bit further. We're now joined by doctors Spyridon and Plakoudas and Andreea Stoian-Karadeli. Spyridon is an assistant professor of Homeland Security at Rapprochement Academy. He's joining us today from Abu Dhabi. Joining us from Istanbul is Andreea, who is an independent expert in national security and terrorism. Andreea and Spyridon, thank you both for taking our time out to join us today. Spyridon, I'd like to start with you. What do you think is behind this rapprochement at this time? As I said, there's a lot that these two countries disagree on, and all of the above are very sensitive topics. But what's interesting and what's important, do you think, about the timing?
Good afternoon from Abu Dhabi. Actually, in January 2021, coincidentally, the very same month of the oath ceremony of President Biden in the US, Turkey started a charm offensive to reset its strained relations with two key countries in the Middle East, Egypt on the one hand, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on the other hand. Despite the successes of Turkey on the field of battle in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh, and to a certain extent Syria, Ankara understood that these successes only increased the number of competitors, if not enemies, in the region. Therefore, Ankara intends to at least normalize or deconflict and de-escalate its strained relations with these two countries in the region, and if possible, advance them to an even better stage, especially in terms of economy and diplomacy. However, due to the deep distrust between these countries on the one hand and Turkey on the other hand, this road to normalization will be a long and hard one. For example, Egypt issued a long list of conditions, if not demands, to Turkey for the normalization of the bilateral ties, from the withdrawal of Turkey's military forces and mercenaries in Western Libya, all the way to extradition to Egypt of members of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
So could Turkey offer such concessions to Egypt? Could Turkey offer other concessions to Saudi Arabia at a subsequent stage? So we can only judge from Turkey's desire for concessions and ability for concessions in the near future, whether the relations will be normalized or not.
Okay, so Andreea, give us the point of view from Turkey, because I would think the Turks also have grievances against these respective countries, such as Egypt. It's a good sign, though, isn't it, that they've reached out to each other? It's a good sign that they're talking, and this probably means that they are then willing to compromise both ways?
Of course, having a renewal of the relations, reapproachment, if you want to call it like this, it's of course a good sign. However, we have to take into consideration that this is not something that happened overnight. Talks have been going on for 1 year already. Of course, not officially, of course, not in front of the media, but the two sides have been trying and communicated and have been in a continuous dialogue for the past year. So what we see today, what happens now in Cairo, is actually the result of 1 year of talks, and it is hope, but as the previous speaker said, there's a lot that they have to agree on, and this is going to take a lot of time. On the other hand, we have to agree that as much as we have on the table in terms of these agreements, as much we have in terms of opportunity. Libya, it's a very difficult topic, and when it comes to the forces that are involved in there, and when it comes to the different sides, the different perspectives that both Turkey and Egypt promote, at the same time, Libya can be a beginning, a starting point for those relations to get back on track. And if it works out well, Libya can be very important for the Eastern Mediterranean agreements and partnerships as well. And that's, again, another opportunity for the relations between the two countries, because both sides are not happy with what happens and with their own rights and with the way they promote their rights in the Eastern Mediterranean. So that's another, hot topic on the list. So from my personal point of view, coming from Turkey and the Turkish zone, I can definitely say that as much as we have in terms of impediments or obstacles in the relations between the two countries, we have as many opportunities for the two countries to get along and start collaborating. But there's still a very long way ahead.
All right, so Spyridon, the benefits far outweigh, I would think, the bad here, right? In the sense that if the two sides were to have further rapprochement, and if Turkey would have rapprochement with others, such as you mentioned as well in your first answer, this would be good for the region, right? Beyond just the economy. So we're talking about Libya, for example, if I may hone in on just that issue for a moment. This would be certainly very good for Libya's stability also?
Of course, because the road to the general elections in December 2021 in Libya can be described as rocky, at least. So the two countries could cooperate in order to resolve the chronic problems in Libya. For example, the problem with the mercenaries, the problem with the armed militias, the problem with the exports of oil, other problems with regards to political instability and factionalism. So if the two countries could agree on a roadmap for normalization, with Libya at its center, most likely that would affect positively the political developments in this neighbor of Egypt, because despite the progress so far with the election of the interim government in Libya, the road to the elections will not be a rosy one, and the threat of renewed military confrontation could be just around the corner. So better for the two countries to de-escalate and agree on a roadmap for peace, rather than quarrel with each other in the Eastern Mediterranean and Libya. And of course, the outcome of such a rapprochement between Turkey and Egypt will not affect only Libya, it will affect also Greece, Cyprus, and to a certain extent, Saudi Arabia. So in a way, the outcome of these exploratory talks and negotiations between Cairo and Ankara will set the tune for developments in other diplomatic areas as well.
All right, so what has brought this on, Andreea, is what I'm trying to get at, because Libya is not a new issue. The disagreements over the Eastern Mediterranean is not a new issue. Muslim Brotherhood, not a new issue again. Why now? Why in the year 2021 or even a year ago was this happening?
Turkey realized in a way or another that just the military achievements that it got on the way, and we have to admit the fact that Turkey has played an enormous role in a lot of conflicts that have been going on in the Middle East. But beyond the fact that it's been pretty successful in its own way, the diplomatic relations are still very important, and Turkey has realized in a way or another that it needs to reconcile with some of the important actors in the Middle East. So it's not really about the timing now, but the timing for over 1 year, 2 years time frame. And at the time is also another issue, and that's beyond the international relations when it comes to the effect of those exploratory talks or rapprochement in terms of the international relations. It's also the national audience that is important, right? So we have to think about it in terms of what the Turkish public is also saying, or what the Egyptian public is also saying when it comes to getting back together, getting back to talks, and maybe developing a better mutual agreement between the two countries. So it's a lot more in terms of internal and external that pushes both governments. It's not just the Turkish one, it's not just the Egyptian one, it's both of them, to realize that talks can push them forward and not back. So I do believe that it's not a real right now timing frame, but it's more of a 1 to 2 years timing frame where all those subjects, not just one or another, but all that they have on the table, which is Libya, which is the Mediterranean issue, the migration issue, the refugees issue, and the relations that are going on and developing between China, Russia, Iran, the position of the USA. There's a lot of factors that have pushed towards Turkey reconsidering its position towards not just Egypt, but Saudi Arabia, for instance.
That's a very good point, Spyridon, that it seems that the public probably is on board for this on both sides, as in the public sentiment for rhetoric either way is probably waning, and there is probably more of an appetite to have everyone sit around and come to some sort of compromise. And this is, of course, better for the region's peoples as well, right?
Well, despite the strained relations between Egypt and Turkey, which of course has spilled over to the public opinion, especially the social media. If the two leaders agree on a roadmap for reconciliation, then most likely the public opinion will support that. However, we must note one critical difference here. On the one hand, the popularity of Sisi in Egypt is somewhat stable despite the problems. On the other hand, the popularity of Erdogan in Turkey is at an all-time low. So Erdogan cannot maneuver like before, especially now that he's allied with a far-rightist party under Bahçeli. So even if Erdogan does agree to some of the demands of Egypt, for example, the one about the Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan must always account for a possible backlash with his own political base back home. And Erdogan at the moment cannot risk much in the same way that he cannot risk such talks with the Kurds about the chronic issue of the PKK, just because of the pressure to his political base. At the same time, he cannot do so many things with regards to Egypt because of the fear for a likely backlash from his own political supporters. So On the one hand, Turkey must do something in order to address its dwindling number of friends in the Middle East. On the other hand, the freedom of maneuver for Erdogan vis-a-vis his own audience in Turkey is very limited. So, in a way, the survivor of the political arena of Turkey, Erdogan, must outdo himself in order to achieve such a great feat.
Very well. We'll have to leave there as a final word as the clock has gotten the best of us. We really appreciate both Spyridon and Andreea speaking to us there from Abu Dhabi and Istanbul, respectively, sharing their expertise with us about what may happen in the coming days, months, years when it comes to relations between Turkey and Egypt. And as Spyridon also mentioned, Turkey and other countries such as Saudi Arabia and others also, which it does have disagreements with. But nevertheless, as I put in my introduction and as our guests agreed, it's a good thing to have people who disagree sitting around the table and talking in a calm fashion instead of, in fact, not talking at all and or using rhetoric both ways. This will be good, hopefully, for Libya. This will be good for the region's people. This will be good, as both of our guests mentioned, for security, certainly, and as well, there will be economic benefits. So the benefits outweigh any other options at this point in time for these countries, and hopefully this is a process that will continue, and the peoples of both sides will support it as well. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, the issue of Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem and in occupied Palestine is an important one, and it's been discussed and it's been happening, of course, for quite a few days now, and we're going to try to shed light on that issue. We know that there is an issue of evictions of Palestinian families from their homes, which is the root of this issue. But of course, the major and macro issue, as always, remains the same vis-a-vis the occupation, etc., which we've discussed a number of times on this show as well. Nevertheless, the scenes that have occurred over the past few nights, just last night as well, at the Al-Aqsa Mosque and others, such scenes that we've seen as well vis-a-vis the evictions, are quite disturbing. And then there's also the reaction, of course, on social media, the social media companies seemingly trying to suppress some of this outpouring of concern for Palestinians that's been taking place around the world. The likes of Instagram and others have been removing posts that have, in fact, to do with Sheikh Jarrah altogether. And that in and of itself is another then form of oppression beyond just also the occupation on the ground. Let's discuss all of those issues a bit further. And I'm joined by Hesham Kadoumi, who is a senior advisor for the Wall and Colonization Resistance Commission. He's joining us today from Ramallah. Joining us today from Tel Aviv is Gideon Levy, who is an award-winning Israeli journalist. He's a weekly Haaretz columnist and author. And joining us from Santa Cruz, California, is Dr. Stephen Zunes, who is a professor of politics at the University of San Francisco. Stephen, Gideon, and Hesham, thank you to all three of you for your time today. Hesham, let me start with you. What is the latest when it comes to this issue of Sheikh Jarrah? I know that there is a postponement right now on an Israeli court's verdict on the evictions, but this is just beyond this specific issue of evictions, isn't it?
Thank you very much, and I would like also to greet your audience and our friends who are joining this conversation. Thank you for bringing this important topic on your news channel. Well, first let me start actually by saying that the problem of Sheikh Jarrah is the problem of Jerusalem, is the problem of the entire occupied West Bank. What's happening these days in Sheikh Jarrah is a systematic, let me say, series that is being perpetrated and by the Israeli occupation authorities and witnessed by the Palestinians, not only in Sheikh Jarrah, not only in occupied Jerusalem, but also in the entire land of the occupied West Bank. Now, the problem of Jerusalem, I don't think that it has started only yesterday and the year before or 4 years before. The problem of Jerusalem has started since the first day of the Israeli occupation to the city. If you are aware, or I don't know if you have, let me say, more information about the Israeli occupation plans that has been put in place to be implemented since the first day of occupying West Bank and Jerusalem, namely the Alone plan that was prepared by the Israeli government that time, which aimed to annex, to expand the municipal territory of Jerusalem and to expand to confiscate more lands around Jerusalem and in the vicinity of Jerusalem, especially in the eastern slopes of Jerusalem, and also the Netanyahu dropless plan that was also developed by the Israeli government in 1978. It was a 5-year plan that aimed to increase number of colonizers in West Bank. Now, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah? Everybody around the world is seeing what's happening. There is they are trying to evict families, Palestinian families who own their houses since hundreds and thousands of years ago for the benefit of some colonizers associations that are active in Jerusalem and on the entire
if I could just come in, Hesham, begin to bring in Gideon into the conversation as well. Gideon, in reaction to the Palestinian protests against what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah, right? We've had some very, very tough rhetoric coming out from the Israeli side. So we've had the deputy mayor in that viral video that's gone online as well, him talking about shooting, a Palestinian activist in the head, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, some of those words, but that's essentially what he said in that video that has come out. And I don't want to just talk about specifically just the deputy mayor, but just overall, the reaction from the Israeli side has been very, very tough. Do you think these evictions still go ahead, and then what would that mean?
First of all, the deputy mayor is really an extremist, and I wouldn't take him as an example, even though, in no other country someone who talks like him could stay in power even one more day. In Europe, he would be accused as a neo-Nazi, not less than this. But coming back to the issue, look, this issue of Sheikh Jarrah, if someone needs any proof for the question, is Israel an apartheid state or not, go to Sheikh Jarrah and decide by yourself. Because what you see there is something very, very simple. Few Jews who lost their property in 1948 claim for this property and get it back, while millions of Palestinians who lost their property in 1948 can only dream about it. What is this if not apartheid? Coming back to your question, I think that we have now a very violent and brutal police with a new commander who comes from the border police, who is the most brutal unit of the Israeli police. And therefore, we might face a lot of brutality and a very strong hand in Jerusalem and elsewhere in the occupied territories. And this is not a very good promise.
Stephen, what is your point of view on this? I've seen a few, very few, of course, U.S. officials, and not, of course, high-ranking ones. I'm saying more like at state levels, who have spoken about this as well, condemning in not so many words what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah. Will this push even Israeli allies to, do you think, speak up against what's happening?
Unfortunately, the U.S. government has been very reticent to specifically criticize actions by Israel, even those that are flagrant violations of international human rights norms. The Biden administration, unfortunately, is no exception. When pressed by the media, the State Department has expressed its concerns, but it hasn't, specifically, called for an end to the repression. They sort of taking the idea that both sides need to calm down when it's clearly the Israelis who are illegally seizing this territory. The U.S. government seems to trust the process, so we'll see what the courts decide. But of course, legally speaking, national courts have no jurisdiction over territories under foreign belligerent occupation, like East Jerusalem is. And so it's it's yet another situation where the United States, which sees itself as the principal mediator of the conflict, is not taking the kind of leadership it has. I think the one hopeful sign, in a sense, is that while this is not getting a lot of publicity in the United States, it's getting some, and I think it's underscoring the growing sense among the American public, which is not yet being reflected in the government, but among the American people at least, that the Israeli government is indeed engaged in these very, very violent racist policies, and that the United States should not continue to allow this sort of thing to continue without protest.
So Hesham, where you're sitting, what is the mood like right now when it comes to what's happening? We've seen just what's happened at Al-Aqsa as well, and I think that, and I would imagine that that can possibly be a very explosive situation.
You know, the situation, the entire Palestinian people is under tremendous pressure. The practices of the occupation we experience all brutal and racist, and we feel the taste of apartheid through the practices of this occupation state. The people here are very furious, and you remember that Jerusalem has been always the spark for clashes and for intifadas and for uprising, and also Jerusalem has always across history been the stability for peace, meaning to say it depends on who is controlling the issue on the ground. The brutal action from the Israeli police and from Israeli soldiers against the peaceful protesters in Jerusalem can bring things very, very badly, especially that the clashes can be also extended to many other areas outside Jerusalem, because we still believe that the Palestinian people has the message to preserve their lands and to preserve their rights and to support the resilience of all citizens on these occupied lands until we have our full rights. So no one can really predict on where things are going, but I can tell you that this escalation can bring the whole area on flame.
You know, Gideon, things, at least what we were told, were meant to be very different, right? Ever since the Abraham Accords, especially with Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, in part. And those two countries that said, in fact, this sort of scenes that we're seeing right now, this sort of talk that we're having right now would not happen, at least, and I'm paraphrasing a bit of what they said. What's changed? I mean, do you think that there's sort of egg on their face, in a sense, to have gone ahead with normalization and to have thought that this would have a huge impact on the ground?
Nobody serious really thought that the Abraham Accords, with all their benefits for Israel and for some Arab countries, will change the core issue, because the core issue is the Palestinian problem. And this was untouched by all those peace agreements. Even peace with Egypt and Jordan didn't solve, and even Oslo didn't solve the Palestinian problem. So as long as this problem continues to bleed, and it does continue to bleed, no diplomatic agreements with other actors can solve the problem. You can try all kinds of bypasses to try to avoid looking at the reality, but by the end of the day, as long as the Palestinians will not get their rights, there will be no peace in the Middle East, and there will be even no kind of law and order, or whatever you want to call it, because as long as the occupation continues, the resistance will continue. History taught us that that's the way of things.
Stephen, I'll give you the final word on that issue that I put to Gideon as well, because, I'm just looking right now and on Twitter in Bahrain and the UAE, in fact, Palestine is what's trending and has trended at night as well when it comes to this issue. So clearly, it seems that there's a disconnect, right, between the peoples in those specific countries that, have signed these Abraham Accords and their governments when it comes to this issue of Palestine.
Well, certainly, these are authoritarian governments, of course, and they're particularly in the Gulf states. There was threats on the freedom of anybody who publicly disagreed with the normalization. In the case of Morocco, the United States formally recognized Morocco's illegal annexation of Western Sahara. Basically, the United States was recognizing illegal occupation in order to reinforce another illegal occupation, because this unilateral recognition without anything in return by Israel is essentially endorsing the occupation. Because for virtually every Arab country for quite a few years now has said that yes, we will recognize Israel in return for Israel recognizing Palestine, in return for Israel withdrawing from the occupied territories. But with the U.S. pressuring these countries to recognize Israel unilaterally, they're losing the leverage that these governments potentially had to help achieve Israeli-Palestinian peace. But I think even though the numbers of families affected by the Israeli attempt to seize these homes in Sheikh Jarrah are fairly small in terms of the overall number of Palestinians who've been displaced over the years. This is really showing the world, showing the international community the nature of the conflict. It is about expulsion. It is about a gradual ethnic cleansing. It's about colonialism, and I think this will indeed raise consciousness in global civil society to an even higher level to challenge the Israeli occupation and U.S. support for the Israeli occupation.
Well, we'll leave that as our final word, but we really appreciate Hesham, Gideon, and Stephen for taking their time out of their busy schedules to join us today. We appreciate the context that they brought to the conversation we're discussing there, of course, more specifically about Sheikh Jarrah, as that issue has been in the spotlight for a number of days now, ever since there was that order to evict Palestinian families. This has spilled out into the Al-Aqsa compound as well, potentially, as I said, explosive situation. And it's not just this very specific incident right now that is important to discuss, right? But it is always the macro issue that we go back to, as all of our guests there alluded to and spoke of also. It has to do with these very basic points of occupation, etc., and what that brings along with it vis-a-vis oppression of the Palestinian people. There have been a few voices, as I said, coming out in certain parts of the Western world. A few state-level officials, even in the U.S., have condemned this in not so many words. But is the tide changing? Is the world realizing that what's happening in occupied Palestine is not acceptable, that this cannot and should not go on in this fashion, especially in the way that, of course, it affects the Palestinians on the ground there? I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, we discussed Islamophobia a number of times as it pertains to Europe. We've had a number of incidents against mosques in Europe in two specific places. One in the UK. We've had Muslims attending a mosque in London who've been pelted with eggs and stones. And we've also had an attack on a mosque in France, in Albertville in France. A Turkish mosque there in the Alpine community was also attacked in an arson attack, that is, and that's of course much more serious because the building itself was attacked in that case. In the context of France, of course, in the context of these two countries may be significantly different. Nevertheless, they're similar in some ways. Also, within France, we know for a while now there's been Islamophobic rhetoric in the air from politicians themselves, sometimes extremely direct and explicit. In the UK, it's less explicit, but there are forms of it which are quite obvious as well when it comes to, quote-unquote, any investigation, seemingly, into Islamophobia or racism on the part of either the Conservative Party or even, really, if we're honest, the Labour Party also, which seemingly, and I may be wrong by this, normalizes then Islamophobia overall. Let's discuss those issues and others a bit further, and I'm joined by Samir, who is a PhD researcher in social policy and Islamophobia at the University of Bristol. He's joining us today from Bristol. And joining us on the line from Paris is Nadia, Henni-Moulaï, who is a journalist, writer, and commentator. Nadia and Samir, thank you both for taking your time out to join us today. Nadia, I'd like to start with you. As I said, in the context of France, it doesn't seem completely surprising, unfortunately, that a mosque would be attacked. But what are your thoughts about this? I mean, are we entering now an era in France where we're going to see these sorts of actions against Muslims and their places of worship?
Thank you for your invitation, first of all. I've been working on these issues for more than 1 decade, and I can say that these polemics and this attack are unfortunately not new. It's really repetitive. It's not a new fact. The question is now, for me, in my opinion, is to know how Muslim communities in France are going to be respected. It is about right, it is about violence, it is about assault, it is about Islamophobia, but it is about respect too. And I think that media and politicians have a very important and very deep responsibilities on this situation. No one of them, for example, wonder how French people who didn't, for example, read the Quran, how these people are going how French people think when you have, for example, media and politicians say on Twitter, on social media, or on TV, let's be Islamophobic. It is a right. We can be Islamophobic. And I think that it's a very, very, very important responsibility. The second thing that I would like to add is that the upcoming presidential election is going to be very complicated for Muslim people, because Islam issues would be a variable, not only because of Marine Le Pen, which is the far-right candidate, but also by Macron. It is about politician agenda.
Yeah. Samir, I know that the context in the UK is different, but in some ways, I mean, it may be connected. I mean, because the two countries are so close, and it seems like almost like a before and after type situation, where even in the UK we have, as I said, more implicit at least forms of Islamophobia when it comes to investigations, apparently, into Conservative Party and Labour Party Islamophobia within their ranks, and even beyond that, just rhetoric by politicians overall and others, which we're sort of allowing to get by. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Waqar. I think arguably France seems to be leading the way on these kind of Islamophobic tendencies and narratives. But I mean, as Nadia says, this isn't a new phenomenon, and that's the same in the UK. I think particularly since 9/11, there's been a lot of political work to institutionalize these kind of mechanisms of Islamophobia through strategies like Prevent. And so similar to the kind of in France, they've had this anti-separatism law that is targeting French Muslims and focusing on this kind of political Islam and Islamic extremism. The UK had a similar strategy with the fundamental British values that were introduced around 2015. And that was to teach this idea of Britishness in schools and try and create a separation between British values and democracy and non-British values, that they would call them, that they were trying to link to particularly Muslim communities. And that was off the back of this scare that schools were becoming too Muslim, and that was a problem for British society. So I think we've seen a similar pushback, and again, with, as you were saying, even investigating cases of Islamophobia, even just trying to define Islamophobia in Europe, there's big pushback to even have a definition for it. A lot of the major think tanks and politicians in the UK have been against even having a definition, which makes it very hard to challenge when there isn't a kind of a centralized definition that we can use to call out these instances. So I think we're seeing a similar trend in the UK, and it's very unfortunate to see a mosque being attacked, particularly during Ramadan. But again, this has happened in the past. We had the attack on the Finsbury Park Mosque in 2017, I think it was, where a man drove from Wales, good 100 miles to drive into a congregation outside the mosque. And a few years prior to that, well, just before that as well, during the Brexit referendum, bacon was thrown at a mosque in Bristol. So these things have been happening over the years.
Now, how have politicians reacted when it comes to the attack on this mosque, this arson attack? And I mean, I have seen a few statements, if I'm not mistaken, about condemnations, but there still doesn't seem to be an understanding, right, between what's happening in the country and the fact that these attacks would happen. Because for me, at least, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is cause and effect, right? So if you create a situation and an atmosphere where Islamophobia is, as you said, acceptable, then these sorts of attacks are to be expected, aren't they?
Yes, I agree with you. I think that politicians are very, how to say, they are very, they are not honest, in fact, because they use Muslim issues, they use Islam issues to be elected, and when they are some assault on the mosque or on the headscarf woman, they say that it's a drama. So I think they belong to the problem. But I would like to point, for me it's very important to insist on that point. I think that there is a politician agenda. And if you remember at Macron's campaign in 2017, he was quite liberal as well on economic issues as on values. He didn't show any rejection of Muslim or veiled women. He said that secularism was a way to live together in France. But in the aftermath of Samuel Paty murder, he was urged by the right wing of his party to take position for a strong laïcité, as we said in French, laïcité, you know. And I would like to say that in October, Macron pronounced a very, very important speech about separatism in the suburban of Paris, which was, in my opinion, the launch of the French presidential election campaign. And I think that Muslim and Islam will be in the heart of the upcoming presidential election.
Samir, is it the same that in the UK as well? I'll give you the final word on this before we let both of you go. Is this more about politics than actual ideology or an ideological, battle in a sense, if I may use that term? Is this about, I don't know, is it the public that is becoming ever more right-wing or Islamophobic, or is this a push to become more Islamophobic, or just, propagating hatred for the sake of getting more votes?
Well, I think we've definitely seen a shift to the right over the last kind of 10, 20 years, maybe particularly since the financial crash. I think Western countries have been trying to find excuses for economic decline, and often that has been, the blame for that has been put on immigrant communities, which has been tied up with kind of anti-Muslim sentiment, particularly around the refugee crisis. And I think right-wing parties have capitalized on that, and then more center-right politicians have felt it strategic to invest in those narratives as well. So you see the Conservative Party in the UK kind of parroting UKIP lines, the UK Independent Party that were pushing for Brexit, and a lot of that rhetoric was around Muslim immigrants and Muslim refugees. And I think that has had a massively detrimental effect on kind of British society and Western society more general, and blaming Muslims for a lot of societal issues that aren't, that Muslims aren't responsible for. Even during coronavirus, we've seen Muslims being blamed for the spread of coronavirus. There were news articles in the UK about secret mosques holding congregations that were completely fabricated. And this only adds to anti-Muslim sentiment. And I think, unfortunately, the logical conclusion of that is mosques being attacked, Muslim women being attacked because they particularly are visible in their religion. And politicians know that it seems to be strategic, as I was saying, and they seem to be buying into that. And you even get Labour politicians in the UK weighing into the grooming gang scandal, which was completely unfounded and blaming Muslims for grooming in the UK. So I think, yeah, there seems to be a continuity of scapegoating Muslims in the UK, which we've seen with immigrant communities throughout history.
Very well. We'll leave it there, Samir and Nadia, but we really appreciate both of you taking our time out this Saturday to discuss this really important issue with us. As we said, we were talking about two specific incidents that have occurred, one at the Ilford Islamic Center in the UK and another at a mosque in Albertville in France. A Turkish mosque there had been attacked, an arson attack, in fact, had taken place there. And at Ilford, worshippers themselves were pelted with stones and other such, and eggs, in fact, as well. What does this mean for the context, or what does this say about the context in both countries about Islamophobia and how it's become seemingly acceptable? What role do politicians' rhetoric, what role does the fact that we're still battling over whether or not Islamophobia is even a thing? I mean, in France, that's still very much even under debate. I mean, they're not even accepted that Islamophobia is in fact a reality. In the UK, then there's a battle of how to even define Islamophobia. And, you know, any investigations into it seem to be very cursory and just too macro to really be able to deal with the issue altogether, and also led by many people who are Islamophobic to begin with. As Nadia said, in the France context, this may be a lot to do with politics, but even that in and of itself is disturbing. Then does that then mean that French society and even UK society are moving ever more right-wing when it comes to the issue of Islam? What does that say about the future of Muslims in these spaces and the future of these countries as quote-unquote tolerant, accepting societies? I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.